They thought I was just sitting in the dust. Coach Miller, the broken man whose 45-year-old wife traded him in for an 18-year-old quarterback on Facebook. They saw a man whose world had just evaporated under the harsh, digital glare of a viral post. They didn't know I was merely waiting for the smoke to clear, allowing them to place all their pieces exactly where I needed them on the board they just lit on fire. This room, the Artemis High locker room, my sanctuary. It smells like victory, cheap disinfectant, and the kind of West Texas sweat that sticks to the concrete like history. For 12 years, this was the purest place I knew. Here, the rules were simple: execution, discipline, and protect your flank. Outside these four walls, my wife, Sarah, decided those rules no longer applied. It was assistant coach Dale, a good man, loyal, but too young to grasp the true malice of the digital age, who showed me the screen. He was white as the chalk lines we drew for plays. "Coach," he stammered, holding out his phone like it was a live rattlesnake. "You need to see this. It everywhere." I didn't flinch. I had seen worse things on worse screens in worse places, long before I traded Black Ops logistics for high school football strategy. I took the phone. The headline on her blog, "Life with the Coach," was an instant punch to the gut, perfectly calibrated for maximum devastation and clicks. After 20 years of emotional neglect, I finally found the man who sees me. Then came the money shot. The line that went global in 90 minutes flat. The 11 words that sealed not my fate, but theirs. The cruel, calculated simplicity of it still echoes in the silence of this empty room. It is hard, but Cal is my truth. He understands my heart. Cal. Caleb Rivers. My star quarterback. The golden arm of Texas football. The kid I had driven 3 states to recruit. The boy I had mentored since he was 14, treating him more like a son than his own negligent father ever did. I handed the phone back to Dale. He was waiting for the roar, the breakdown, the rage that burns the soul. What he got was the quiet calm my former commanders knew meant the firing solution was locked. "Interesting choice of words, Dale," I said, my voice low, just above a whisper. "Emotional neglect." That's not a phrase Sarah uses. She got that from a script. Dale looked confused. "Coach, the whole town is talking. They're calling him the kid and you the loser. It's trending." Trending. That was the core of it. Sarah didn't want love. She wanted attention. She wanted to transform a simple act of infidelity into a national narrative of female empowerment and psychological liberation. Using my quiet life and Cal, his youth as the fuel for her fire. I stood up, walked over to the water cooler, and poured myself a cup of lukewarm, metallic-tasting water. I drank it slowly, every single muscle fiber in my body, honed over decades of high-stakes environments, was screaming for me to react, to fight, to justify. But justification is for the innocent. I was aiming for something much more permanent than fleeting public vindication. "They've kicked off early, Dale," I said, putting the cup down. "Tell Jenkins I'm taking a personal day, and tell him that while I appreciate his sympathy, I don't need it. What I need is a clean slate to operate." I walked out of the locker room, leaving the scent of turf and ambition behind. The crowd outside was already starting to gather. Reporters, gawkers, and the usual small-town vultures. They wanted a show. They wanted Coach Miller sobbing into a mic about betrayal. They were going to get a show, just not the one they paid for. Because when you accuse a wolf of being a sheep, You better be damn sure he hasn't been sharpening his teeth in the dark for 20 years. I closed the door. The sound of the heavy metal latch clicking shut was the sound of my old life ending, and the very deliberate, cold sound of Jedediah Miller restarting his true work. The geography of hate in a small Texas town is remarkably precise. It maps itself onto Main Street, pools around the courthouse square, and concentrates viciously right on your front lawn. When I drove the beat-up Ford pickup, I usually used for hauling equipment back toward my modest ranch house, a house I had specifically chosen for its anonymity and distance from the boosters' mansions. The spectacle was already fully formed. There was a faded banner taped to my mailbox. Shame. Not even creative, just brute, self-righteous judgment. Neighbors who had smiled and waved the week before were now standing on their porches, gazing with that peculiar mix of pity and vicious curiosity. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at the spectacle Sarah had created. The phone rang. It was Mr. Jenkins, the principal. A good man, a weak man caught between his moral compass and the overwhelming economic gravity of the football program. Jed, coach. Jenkins's voice was tight, thin. I had to call. I'm getting calls from the booster club, the superintendent, the alumni association. They are furious. Not about Sarah, oddly enough, but about the distraction. Of course, I replied, pulling into the driveway, ignoring the paparazzi wannabe with a telephoto lens hiding in the bushes. They don't care about morality, Jenkins. They care about the SEC contract Cal is supposed to sign, and my scandal threatens their investment. Look, Jed, I have to officially place you on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending investigation of conduct detrimental to the school's image. It's procedural. Please don't make a scene. No scene necessary, Jenkins. I am already gone. I hung up before he could offer another pointless apology. Inside the house, the silence was sharp. Sarah had always filled this place with noise, talk radio, the clatter of her expensive kitchen appliances, and her constant, performative laughter for the camera. Now it was just the oppressive hum of the central air conditioner. She hadn't just packed her bags. She had performed an inventory. She took everything that was aesthetically valuable to her new narrative, the hand-stitched quilts, the expensive antique mirror ID bought her, the coach's wife memorabilia she'd monetized for years. She even took the damned coffee maker, likely so she could blog about how I left her emotionally and domestically unsupported. I walked into my home office, which doubled as a trophy room, a shrine to the hard work of hundreds of boys who had bought into my system. I looked at the awards, the perfectly polished bronze footballs. It felt like walking through a museum dedicated to a dead man. I didn't mourn the loss of the wife. Sarah Miller had died years ago, replaced by an influencer obsessed with her own reflection in the lens. I mourned the loss of the clean slate, the life I had built here to escape my past. I stripped off my Artemis High polo shirt, the red and black colors suddenly feeling suffocating. I went to the back of my closet, pushing aside the seasonal hunting gear and the cheap luggage. Behind a false panel, secured by a complex magnetic lock, was a small, black safe. I didn't need a key code. The combination was muscle memory, ingrained from years spent working in the places where failure meant global catastrophe, not just losing a high school championship. Inside, there wasn't a gun. Not yet, anyway. There was a hard drive, encrypted with military-grade protocol, and a small satellite-linked laptop with a specialized VPN connection. This wasn't for coaching film. This was for information warfare. "I am closing the file on Coach Miller," I muttered, my voice rough from disuse. Now, Jedediah gets back to work. I logged onto the secure network. My fingers, accustomed to analyzing defensive structures and identifying hidden weaknesses in opposing lines, moved across the keyboard with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't a sudden, passionate affair. This was an operation. Passion is messy. Sarah's move was surgical. And in my world, surgery requires funding, planning, and external consultation. They attacked me publicly, aiming for maximum emotional damage. But I wasn't going to reply with emotion. I was going to reply with fact, with precision, and with overwhelming force in the one arena they hadn't bothered to scout: finance and motive. I wasn't looking for proof of adultery. I was looking for the evidence of a conspiracy to commit fraud. Because nobody sacrifices their life, their marriage, and their comfortable Texas existence just for a moment of youthful indiscretion. Not Sarah. She always demanded a profit. The digital landscape is a vast, interconnected organism, and Sarah, bless her heart, thought that by using cute emojis and public platforms, she was untraceable. She forgot two fundamental rules. A truly dedicated predator leaves no tracks, and those who crave attention will always leave a paper trail. Or in her case, a pixel trail. I started with the money. Sarah's blog, Life with the Coach, had been moderately successful, enough for sponsored content and a few book deals. But the sudden virality of her confession was not an accident. It was an investment. Scandal means clicks. Clicks mean advertisers, and advertisers mean rapid wealth. I used a decryption tool and a few backdoors. Tools acquired long ago during a tenure that required I know exactly how deep the rabbit hole went, to bypass her public firewalls. My gaze wasn't fixed on her bank account, which was predictably average. My focus was on the metadata, the IP addresses, the timestamps, and the unusual communications in the weeks prior to the viral post. It was Chapter 4 in the playbook of the psychologically manipulative. Plan the betrayal long before the execution, secure your exit, and then feign surprise when the public is horrified. First discovery, 3 weeks ago. Sarah had purchased an expensive consulting package from a firm based in Santa Monica, specializing in crisis PR management for emerging influencers. I read the boilerplate description. We specialize in narrative control, transforming potential personal setbacks into opportunities for market expansion and brand integrity restructuring. I smiled. A thin, cold line across my face. No self-respecting Texas woman experiencing genuine heartache hires a Malibu spin doctor. She hires a lawyer and maybe a good therapist. Sarah hired a strategist. This was not a moment of passion. It was a hostile takeover of my personal life, disguised as a vulnerable confession. Next, I found a series of detailed encrypted emails to a private account. The subject lines were generic: recipe testing, draft review, but the content, once decrypted, was clinical. One email, dated a month before the post, detailed her financial goals for the divorce settlement, cross-referenced with potential earnings from a shock value memoir. She was pricing me out like a used car. But the truly fascinating exchange was with an unknown local entity. The messages were veiled, discussing future opportunities concerning the stadium project and new sponsorship infrastructure. This wasn't about the blog. This was about football, money, and control over the very program I had built. Why did she need to destroy my reputation to facilitate a stadium deal? The answer had to be Marcus Thorne. Marcus Thorne, chairman of the Artemis Booster Club. Wealthy, entitled, and possessing the deep-pocketed arrogance that defines small-town power brokers. He was the kind of man who viewed the high school football team not as a reflection of community values, but as a tax-exempt vehicle for local power and influence. Thorne had always been too close to the program. Too many demands about playing time. Too many unsolicited gifts for Cal Rivers. A new truck, private tutoring sessions, travel to elite camps. Thorne wasn't fostering talent. He was protecting his asset. Cal was the crown jewel, the ticket to major college football, the reason the boosters could attract new money to Artemis. And I, with my insistence on academic standards and meritocracy over ego, was a potential roadblock. I leaned back in the worn leather chair, the faint scent of old spice and decades of meticulous planning surrounding me. Sarah, the emotional manipulator, was simply the frontline attack. Thorne, the financier, was the enemy commander, the one pulling the strings behind the curtain. And Cal. Poor Cal was just a handsome tool, an 18-year-old vanity project caught between a bored woman and a corrupt businessman. I closed the laptop, the screen going black. I didn't need to dive further into the digital mud yet. I had the why. Now I needed the how, the physical evidence that would allow me to bypass the court of public opinion and go straight to the courts of law and finance. They underestimated my patience, I whispered to the empty room. And they fundamentally misunderstood that I didn't come to Artemis to escape my skills. I came to find a place where I wouldn't have to use them. A quiet knock came at the front door. I checked the peephole. It wasn't a reporter. It was Marcus Thorne. Time to have a chat with the commander-in-chief. The meeting would be conducted under my terms. I opened the door, deliberately leaving the screen door latched. It created a subtle barrier, forcing Thorne to stand on the porch in the harsh, late-afternoon Texas sun, looking up at me. A small but necessary psychological advantage. Marcus Thorne looked exactly like the kind of man who should be running a successful, slightly shady fertilizer company, perfectly pressed khakis, a blindingly white polo shirt with an embroidered Artemis logo, and a gold watch that cost more than my first car. His smile was wide, empathetic, and utterly artificial. Jed, my friend. Tough times, he boomed, attempting to clap me on the shoulder through the wire mesh. Just wanted to check on you. Hard to believe Sarah would do this after all the town's given her. Come in, Marcus, I said, unlatching the door and stepping back just enough to imply hospitality, but not friendship. Thorne walked into the living room, immediately scanning the empty spaces where Sarah's knickknacks used to be. He was checking the damage. It is a clean break, I observed, pouring 2 glasses of iced tea. A simple, neutral gesture that makes people think they are about to have a relaxed conversation. She took the sentiment, left the furniture. Thorne settled onto the couch, crossing one immaculately polished loafer over the other. Look, Jed, I'm not here as a booster. I'm here as a friend. This is devastating. Truly devastating. He paused, leaning forward conspiratorially. But we have to talk about the program. The season starts in 3 weeks. We have Cal, the highest-rated quarterback prospect in Artemis history, and the media circus is distracting him. The scouts are getting nervous. Scouts are nervous about Cal, his focus, or about the sudden public moral instability of the program, Marcus. I asked calmly, taking a slow sip of my tea. Thorne waved a dismissive hand. Details, Jed, details. The point is, the best thing for everyone now, for you, for Sarah, and for the Artemis legacy, is a clean, quiet exit. He pulled a thick, cream-colored envelope from the inside pocket of his blazer. It was sealed with an expensive, embossed logo. I spoke with Jenkins, with the legal team. We understand you, have given 12 years of your life. We want to compensate you fairly for the embarrassment and reputational damage, as they call it. He pushed the envelope across the coffee table toward me. Inside is a severance package. 6 figures, Jed. Paid as a consulting fee, so we keep it quiet and clean. You agree to sign an NDA, step down quietly, and take a long vacation. Say Florida. No questions asked, no lawsuits, just peace. I looked at the envelope. I didn't touch it. That's a generous offer, Marcus, I said, my voice maintaining that smooth, low drawl that always made people comfortable just before I delivered bad news. But I don't trade my integrity for 6 figures, and I certainly don't trade the reputation of my program for your silence. Thorne's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of pure corporate frustration. Jed, let's be adults. What integrity? Your wife publicly humiliated you and slept with an 18-year-old on your watch. Your integrity is, frankly, shredded. This money is a parachute. Take it before the board votes to terminate you for cause, which will leave you with nothing. I reached out, finally touching the envelope, not to take it, but to slide it back to him. You misunderstand the situation, Marcus. I didn't fail the program. The program failed me because it allowed people like you to treat it as a personal ATM and a prestige project. I paused, letting the silence fill the room. I looked him directly in his polished, calculating blue eyes. You are worried about the SEC contracts and the media circus. I am worried about the foundation you laid to get this contract. And I've been doing some auditing of my own. I watched as the color drained slightly from his face. My calm assurance was clearly not part of his script. Auditing, he scoffed, recovering quickly. What are you talking about, Jed? You are a football coach, not an accountant. You would be surprised what I used to audit, Marcus. Before I coached football, my job involved reconstructing scenarios where people in positions of trust made extremely costly errors in judgment. Financial, ethical, and occasionally terminal errors. I leaned forward. Let's talk about the new field lighting tender, Marcus. $800,000. It went to a company called Lone Star Logistics. A company that just happens to be registered to a P.O. box controlled by your nephew in Waco, 300 miles from here. No bids, no public vetting. Just a clean pass for inflated costs. Thorne's composure cracked. His lips tightened. That is slander, Jed. That's business. We're talking about your personal life here, not my community contributions. But that's where you made your mistake, I countered, standing up. You made my personal life your business to cover up your corrupt business in my program. You used Sarah's ambition and Cal as ego as cover fire. You're grasping at straws, you pathetic, broken man. Thorne spat, rising to his feet, discarding the pretense of sympathy. Am I? I picked up the iced tea glass. The Booster Club contract stipulates that any major financial decision that negatively impacts the public image of the school can be overturned, provided there is proof of malfeasance. And I have receipts, Marcus. More than 6 figures worth. I pointed to the envelope on the table. You can keep your severance. I prefer to get paid in justice. And trust me, the price of justice is much, much higher than this. He stared at me, his face twisting into pure, frustrated rage. He snatched the envelope. You just sealed your professional fate, Miller. The board meets next week. You will be finished, and I promise you, you will never coach again. I am already finished with your game, Marcus, I said, opening the front door. Now, I suggest you go talk to your nephew, because the first thing I audited was Lone Star Logistics, and I found more than just field lights. I found a deep, expensive pattern. Thorne stormed out, slamming the screen door so hard the frame rattled. I stood there for a moment, watching his polished sedan speed away. He thought he had seen my breakdown. All he had seen was the quiet focus before the strike. He had confirmed my suspicion. The affair was a necessary demolition to facilitate a profitable crime. My next step required turning the hunter, Cal Rivers, into the hunted. And that meant using his greatest weakness, his fear of failure. Caleb Rivers was easy prey. Not because he was stupid, he was actually quite sharp on the field, but because he believed his talent made him invincible. In the world of high school sports, a 5-star prospect is treated like minor royalty, shielded from consequence. That kind of bubble makes the skin thin and the ego fragile. I didn't want to humiliate him. I wanted to dismantle his protection. First, I had to ensure his handlers felt the pressure. I utilized a secure, untraceable burner email address to send a very specific message to Cal's highly paid and notoriously aggressive sports agent, a man named Rick Donovan, based in Dallas. The subject line was simply, Risk Assessment, Rivers SEC Offer. The body of the email contained 3 carefully chosen pieces of information, presented as unconfirmed but highly credible rumors leaking from the Artemis community. 1. A detailed note on Cal's abysmal GPA and the specific requirement of the SEC school's academic compliance office. I knew this from years of handling recruiting paperwork. 2. A highly precise description of a specific piece of specialized camera equipment, a drone with high-definition thermal imaging that had recently gone missing from the school's science lab. 3. A pointed reference to potential undisclosed financial transactions with a married adult, implying criminal liability that extended beyond simple adultery. I hit send. Then I waited 5 minutes before adding a final 4th point in a separate email. 1. A detailed map of the school parking lot camera blind spots, coinciding with the drone's disappearance, along with the precise time Cal's car was seen idling near the lab. I was applying psychological tourniquets, one by one. I wasn't accusing, I was planting seeds of catastrophic doubt. The agent, Donovan, wouldn't care about my shattered marriage, but he would jump out of a moving vehicle to protect a multi-million-dollar future contract. He would now pressure Cal to confess any minor infraction that could jeopardize the deal. The second part of the strategy involved Sarah. I needed them to turn on each other. I tracked Sarah to a high-end rental property she had secured near Houston, probably staging photo shoots for her inevitable book cover. I sent her a similarly veiled message, delivered via a platform she thought was secure, referencing her ongoing discussions with Thorne about equity in the new stadium project. My message to Sarah was brief. Thorne is selling you out. He only needed the scandal to leverage the board. When he gets his vote, Cal will be disposable, and you will be the exposed co-conspirator in his fraud. Check his financials. Sarah, driven by greed, would instantly suspect betrayal. She didn't trust anyone, least of all Thorne. The idea that she could be used as a distraction while two men, Thorne and Cal, secured millions in future earnings would drive her into a paranoid frenzy. The beautiful simplicity of my plan lay in the fact that I didn't have to convince the public of my innocence. I simply had to make the guilty turn on each other. I returned to my digital deep dive, focusing on the details of Cal's indiscretion, stealing a drone to impress an older woman. It was juvenile, but the theft was still a felony, especially considering the drone, specialized nature and cost. Later that evening, the phone rang. It was Cal. I almost didn't recognize his voice. The usual confident swagger was gone, replaced by a jittery, panicked edge. Coach Miller, Jed, please, we need to talk. We do, Cal. But not as coach and quarterback, I said, my voice utterly devoid of warmth. We talk now as two men, one of whom is about to destroy the other's future. He tried bravado. Destroy. You think a blog post is going to destroy my career? I am Cal Rivers. I am the next Heisman winner. You're an 18-year-old child, Cal, who is 3 weeks away from throwing away everything you worked for because you let a desperate woman inflate your ego. And no, the blog post won't destroy you. I paused, injecting a controlled dose of cold finality into my tone. The police report on the stolen $12,000 thermal drone from the science lab, combined with the criminal complaint for felony conspiracy to commit fraud with the Booster Club chairman, that will destroy you. That will ensure you never take a snap at a major college. The line went silent for a long moment. I could practically hear his mind cycling through the worst-case scenarios. How? How do you know about the drone? He stammered. Cal, I coached you. I know how you throw a ball, how you read a defense, and how you behave when you think no one is watching. You used the drone to get expensive, low-altitude shots for Sarah's travel content, didn't you? She wanted to look exotic on the river trips. It was just for a few days. I was going to put it back, he pleaded. The statute of limitations on grand theft doesn't care about your intentions, Cal, and your agent, Rick Donovan. I imagine he's having a spectacular meltdown right now, realizing the asset he protected is actually a massive liability. She made me do it, Jed. Sarah said it would be fun. She said the school wouldn't miss it. There it was, the fracture. He wasn't defending her. He was throwing her under the bus. Sarah made her choices, Cal. You made yours, I stated. Here's your reality. Your agent is panicking. The Booster Club chairman is about to be indicted for fraud, and you are the key witness, caught between two felonies, theft and statutory entanglement, with a co-conspirator in a financial crime. You are the perfect patsy. What do I do, coach? What can I do? He sounded utterly defeated. You show up, I commanded. Next Tuesday, at the board meeting, you sit quietly. And when I give the signal, you tell the truth. Not about your feelings for Sarah, but about the drone, the money, and what Marcus Thorne promised you. If I do that, the SEC deal is dead, he whispered. No, Cal, I corrected him. It's already dead. But if you tell the truth, you might save your self-respect. And maybe, just maybe, you can start over as a man who learns from his mistakes instead of a boy who runs from them. Choose wisely, Cal. The clock is running out on this play. I hung up, the satisfying click of the receiver echoing the finality of the decision I had forced upon him. Now all the pieces were moving. The chairman was stressed, the queen was paranoid, and the knight was cornered. It was time to prepare the stage for the final act. I had to ensure the venue, the school board meeting, was ready for the inevitable implosion. The Artemis High School Board of Trustees meeting was always held in the small, carpeted auditorium, a room designed for uncomfortable metal folding chairs and the stifling atmosphere of civic duty. It was the perfect stage for psychological warfare. Public, but rigid. Emotional, but governed by procedure. I arrived precisely 10 minutes before the scheduled start time. Not too early, which would imply desperation, and not late, which would imply disrespect. I was there to deliver a performance of quiet, unassailable confidence. The room was packed. Word had spread through the town like wildfire. Coach Miller was coming to fight his termination. The citizens of Artemis, who had spent the last 2 weeks calling for my head, now craved the drama of my downfall. I saw Jenkins, the principal, sitting on the stage, looking like a man awaiting the guillotine. I saw the 6 grim-faced board members, and then I saw the 2 protagonists of the betrayal. Marcus Thorne was seated prominently in the front row, flanked by his aggressive, expensive attorney from Austin, a clear sign that Thorne anticipated a legal confrontation, not just a moral debate. Thorne caught my eye. He offered a tight, challenging smirk. He thought he was prepared. And there was Sarah. She was wearing a perfectly distressed dress, her makeup carefully applied to make her look tearful and fragile, but still impeccably polished for any camera lens. She had a companion, her crisis PR specialist, a young woman with a sleek ponytail and an air of detached superiority, ready to live-tweet Sarah's vulnerability. Sarah stared at me, a mixture of condescension and pity in her gaze. She thought I was going to beg for my job back. I walked past them, not acknowledging either. I took a seat 3 rows back, away from the stage, allowing the full weight of the town's scrutiny to fall upon me. I was a spectator in my own trial. The meeting began with the usual platitudes. Then the board chair, Mrs. Henderson, a woman whose son I had coached to a state title, delivered the inevitable motion. The board is considering a motion to terminate the employment of head coach Jedediah Miller, citing Section 4A of the employment contract, concerning conduct deemed detrimental to the reputation of Artemis High School. A murmur ran through the crowd. Jenkins read a prepared statement, reluctantly listing the reasons: public scandal, distraction, failure to uphold the moral standards expected of a faculty member. We will now hear from Mr. Thorne, chairman of the Booster Club, regarding the future direction of the football program, Mrs. Henderson announced. Thorne rose. He launched into a polished, self-aggrandizing speech about saving the children and restoring faith in the Artemis legacy. He spoke of an urgent need to install a new, powerful, and expensive infrastructure to support the program, which naturally included immediate approval for his inflated construction contracts. We need a strong, focused leader, Thorne concluded, his voice ringing with false sincerity. And regrettably, Coach Miller, despite his past achievements, is no longer capable of providing that focus. We must move on, swiftly and decisively, before this scandal damages our opportunity for greatness. The crowd applauded politely. Thorne sat down, victorious. He had framed the scandal as a simple, painful necessity. Coach Miller, you are invited to make a final statement to the board before we vote, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice laced with sadness. I rose slowly, deliberately. I walked not to the podium on the stage, but to the center aisle, turning to face the entire audience, Sarah, Thorne, and the town itself. I spoke quietly. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I used the cadence of a man who knows the absolute truth, regardless of the noise. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson, board members. I appreciate the opportunity to address the charges. I will not waste your time arguing about my marriage. That is settled. However, I must clarify that I am not here today to save my job. I paused, meeting the collective gaze of the town. I am here to save this town from the people who are trying to steal its future, using my scandal as a convenient smokescreen. A gasp went through the audience. Thorne stiffened, his jaw muscles clenching. Mr. Thorne just spoke eloquently about new infrastructure, I continued, gesturing toward the booster chairman. I agree. We need new infrastructure. We need honest infrastructure. Infrastructure that is not built on inflated invoices, fraud, and the exploitation of our students. I looked directly at Thorne. Marcus, let's talk about the $800,000 lighting contract given to Lone Star Logistics. A company that, according to the documents I have submitted to the board just moments ago, has absolutely no experience in stadium lighting, but is extremely experienced in being a shell company for your private financial gain. I pulled a thin file from my jacket pocket, just enough paper to look authoritative, and placed it on the nearest folding chair. The room erupted. People were whispering, looking from me to Thorne. Thorne's lawyer immediately stood up. Objection! This is irrelevant slander, Your Honors. We are here to discuss Mr. Miller's conduct. On the contrary, I replied, my voice steady. My conduct is the only reason this fraud is coming to light. Mr. Thorne needed me gone. He needed my integrity neutralized so he could push through this deal. And how did he do it? By coordinating with my wife, Sarah Miller. I turned to Sarah, who looked genuinely terrified for the first time. Sarah believed she was building her media empire, but she was actually serving as the advanced demolition team for Marcus Thorne's financial fraud. She was promised a percentage of the sponsorship contracts if she could create a scandal that would guarantee my instant, irreversible removal. I pulled out a second piece of paper, a printout of the redacted email exchange between Sarah and the Crisis PR firm, cross-referenced with the financial terms of her deal with Thorne, his holding company. I laid it on the chair next to the first file. This is not a story of a woman looking for love, I stated, the conviction in my voice overpowering the rising noise in the room. This is a criminal conspiracy between a man obsessed with money and a woman obsessed with clicks, and they used an 18-year-old child as a pawn. At that moment, the back doors of the auditorium opened. Two impeccably dressed men in dark suits, who clearly were not from Artemis, entered the room, moving quickly toward Thorne. They weren't police. They were federal agents. I had called in my favors. Thorne saw them. His face went gray. "This is ridiculous. I'm leaving," he yelled, scrambling to stand up. "Sit down, Marcus," one of the agents said, pulling out a badge. "We have questions about Lone Star Logistics and interstate wire fraud." The focus shifted instantly. The board members were horrified. The crowd was stunned. Sarah started to stand, clutching her purse. "Jed, you can tee. This is my life, my career." "Your career, Sarah, died the moment you tried to sell your husband for a viral headline," I said, cold as stone. I looked back at the board. "There is one last piece of the puzzle. The pawn. The one you thought was the golden boy." I looked toward the back of the room. Caleb Rivers, my golden quarterback, walked slowly down the aisle. He was pale, his eyes red. He stopped right behind Sarah. "Cal," I said, projecting my voice just enough. "Tell the board the truth. Tell them about the drone and what Marcus Thorne promised you if you stayed quiet." Cal looked at the stunned, silenced room. He looked at Sarah, who was desperately shaking her head, trying to signal him to silence. Then he looked at me. He saw no judgment, only expectation. He inhaled deeply, the sound scratchy in the sudden silence. "Mr. Thorne told me. He told me he would guarantee my contract if I helped Sarah make the scandal look real. And the drone. I stole the drone for Sarah, to get pictures for her blog. She said it was just a loan." The confession was a hammer blow. Sarah was visibly shaking, realizing the magnitude of the fallout. The PR agent was already packing her bag, abandoning the sinking ship. I looked at the board. Madame Fresh. "The charges against me are dismissed by the facts. The program has been corrupted by the people who claimed to protect it. My work here is done." I nodded once to the federal agents, acknowledging the delivery of my payment. I didn't wait for the vote. I didn't wait for the apologies. I turned and walked toward the exit, leaving the chaos, the arrests, and the collapse of two carefully constructed lives behind me. The sound of the slamming auditorium door was the sound of true silence. I had won the quiet war. 2 weeks later, the air in Artemis felt different, cleaner. The stench of hypocrisy and cheap greed had been replaced by the quiet, nervous energy of legal discovery and FBI inquiries. Thorne was in deep trouble, held on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. Sarah, whose carefully curated life had dissolved into a series of panicked court appearances, was facing civil suits from the school board and a brutal public backlash. Her blog, which she had successfully weaponized against me, was now a public shaming ground. The comments section was a spectacular display of digital cannibalism. I had been officially exonerated and offered reinstatement, complete with a massive 6-figure retroactive payment and a public apology from Principal Jenkins and Mrs. Chilner. Henderson. I accepted the payment, but politely declined the job. I sat on the empty front porch swing. The house was sold, closing in 3 days, drinking strong black coffee. The banner of shame had been replaced by a few bouquets of flowers and hastily scrawled apologies left by well-meaning but fundamentally transient neighbors. The phone rang. It was Jenkins. "Jed, I just wanted to check in. I don't know how to thank you. You saved us. You saved the program, and you exposed years of rot." "You don't need to thank me, Jenkins," I said, watching a dust devil spin across the field. "Just make sure the next coach knows the difference between winning a game and running a clean operation. The real enemy is always the one wearing your colors. What will you do now, Jed?" "I am done with the sidelines, Jenkins. Time for a quieter kind of life." I hung up, knowing that Jenkins and the town would never truly understand who Jedediah Miller was. They saw a man who had orchestrated a perfect, intricate revenge. They didn't see the underlying philosophy that guided the strike. Precision is mercy. I could have destroyed Sarah and Thorne instantly and publicly, but the slow, tactical dismantling, forcing them to self-destruct under their own hubris, was the most effective form of justice. My true goal was achieved. I had flushed out the corruption, and in doing so, I had regained my own discipline. For 12 years, I had let the veneer of Coach Miller dull my edge. The crisis had sharpened it back to a razor point. I looked down at my hand. It was steady. It was capable. I had bought a small, isolated ranch 50 miles outside of Artemis. Plenty of land, no close neighbors, and good satellite reception. The place was remote enough that I could be Jedediah the Hermit or Jedediah the Strategist. I preferred the second. Before packing the secure laptop, I received a final, pre-arranged message. It was encrypted, sourced from a long-dormant government channel. The sender was a name I hadn't seen in over a decade, Vance, my last handler. The message was succinct, status check. Are you operational? We have a situation. Cleanup required. Discreet. I smiled, a genuine, slow smile that reached my eyes. It wasn't the relieved smile of a man escaping a terrible ordeal. It was the focused smile of a man returning to his element. I thought about Cal. He had dodged the felony charges due to his cooperation, but his dreams of an SEC contract were, as predicted, annihilated. He would likely play Division III ball, far away from the spotlight. He learned the hardest lesson. Consequences are not reserved for the talentless. I messaged back to Vance, operational. Send coordinates. And Vance, no more high school sports. I closed the laptop, packed it into the reinforced travel case, and locked the door to the house. I left no note, no forwarding address. My life in Artemis was now a closed chapter, a brief period of forced retirement. I drove toward the setting sun, the dust of the small town finally settling behind me. The engine hummed a low, comforting vibration. I wasn't running away. I was moving toward a problem that required my specific, unique skill set. The quiet season was over. It was time to play the real game again.